When you think of Honda, the first thing that comes to mind is the Honda Civic. After all, it is the brand's most iconic and most popular car of all time. But as you were probably aware, there are a bunch of sports cars in their lineup as well, such as the S2000, the Acura Integra, which is technically a Honda, and the good old Del Sol, Prelude, and CRX. These cars carry such a huge following both on and off the track, whether it's a street build that someone's got or a dragster demon that they made pushing stupid amounts of power out of their B series or K series. These are cars that have incredibly good following, and as a result, many people are aware of them. But what about some of the other cars in Honda's lineup? What about other types of builds that you could do with some of these Hondas? Well, today on this episode of Unexpected, we're talking about 5 different Honda models, and by proxy, Acura models, that could make for really good project cars. This is Unexpected. The first car on this list is one that we've actually done tutorials for in the past, and that is the old Honda Pilot. Now, if you're not familiar with the Honda Pilot, that's forgivable. Mainly because it was a bigger, boxier SUV. It wasn't a light SUV like the CR-V, and thus wasn't easily accessible. In fact, this was a bit of a more expensive model with more power, a J series, and if you weren't aware of it as an average consumer not well versed in the brand, it was forgivable. These sold pretty well, but typically to people who are already familiar with Honda, because after all, a lot of its styling is based on the previous EK. While for some people that original Gen 1 styling works really well, like myself, not everyone was keen on it, and as a result, these cars kind of got a little bit of a cult following to them. There are forums dedicated to these cars because, well, people love them. My old landlord, when I lived in Leesburg, had a old 2005 Honda Pilot, and he loved that thing to death. Even when he got newer cars, he maintained his Honda Pilot. He kept it alive. He did some more mods to it after we did the intake video. He loved that car, and as a result, I now have a newfound appreciation for these because you can do so much stuff with them. Lift them, lower them, boost them, do whatever you want to them. With the amount of space that came in these cars and the power that they contain just out the door, it's a lot of fun and a great daily. And if you're wanting something to do, something more along those daily build lines, this is going to be a great vehicle for you. But as I already stated, people who own these are a little cultish about them. So if you find one for sale, you may have to do some sweet talking to really soften them up to sell it. The next vehicle on this list is actually something we've kind of already talked about, just with a whole other body style and a whole other level of look, and that is the Acura MDX first generation. This car is basically the luxury brother of the Honda Pilot. And the reason why I wanted to give this particular model a separate distinction between the two is they really do look different. They behave differently. The MDX is heavier because it's a luxury vehicle with all kinds of extra amenities, a slightly softer suspension. I actually grew up with one of these. My family had bought one from the dealership, brand new, 0-mile kind of car, and drove that thing probably well into the 200,000 mile range. We never had a single issue with them. The reliability is 100% there that you expect from a Honda, and they drive great in snow, in dirt, and what other conditions you can think of. They actually do pretty well. They're just great cars, and you can get them for pretty cheap. Like I said, they're along the same lines as a Honda Pilot, just with the Acura badge that went from being known as a sports badge to a luxury badge. It was that weird time in Acura's history where it departed from the norm and then tried to go back to it. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Still blessed with that incredibly good J35 and then later J37, this thing was a beast. With plenty of power to get around and also just VTEC for days, these things are a lot of fun. And if you know how to handle a heavier vehicle, consider getting one of these, because nothing's more fun than a car that you can just throw around and know that it'll take it. Up next, we've got a car that actually has made some YouTube fame, but just no one ever wants to mod them. That's the first gen Honda Odyssey. Now listen, I get it, not everyone's keen on van builds, and that's okay. There's plenty of fish in the sea when it comes to modifications and cars that you can build. But I personally love van builds because the creativity you can have with these cars is almost endless. Slamming them, raising them up, doing massive engine swaps into them, making them rear engine. There's so much you can do with a van, and the Honda Odyssey first generation is no exception. As the Boosted Boys did so well, you can swap pretty much any 4-cylinder Honda engine into this car, mounted transversely, and it'll do well. I mean, I've seen Ks put in here, I've seen, B20s, B16s put in these things. There's so much you can do with them, provided you have the money to buy all the parts for it. And they take the power pretty well because these things are actually really light for what they are. Most of the time you think of a van, you think of a heavy car. You think of something that's big and bulky and just heavy. But these are light, limber, not so big. Getting one of these, I will admit, is actually a little bit difficult for me because I actually tried to find one for a little while. I want to have a van where I could go to car shows and we can slide the door open and me and the homies can just sit and chill in a nice little air-conditioned box while everyone else sweats to death in the 90-degree heat. That often happens at car meets around here. But I just couldn't find one. Finding these things is getting increasingly difficult just because they are old. And most of the time the people who own these drive them into the ground because it's a van. It's what you do. Vans aren't something that are seen as desirable unless you're a van enthusiast, and therefore they don't get treated with as much love and care as say a 240 or an Integra might have, because there's no heritage to be had. It's just a van. So if you do find one, expect to do a little bit of TLC, not just in the engine and drivetrain and all that, but in the actual body of the vehicle, cleaning it out, all that jazz. You probably can find one for about $1,000. Just gotta find a grandma who's willing to let theirs go. The next car is part of the beginning of the toaster box heritage, the Honda Element. Remember how I was talking about, van life and van builds? Well, it turns out in Japan that is in fact a way of life. And to celebrate that, several different manufacturers made these boxy toaster oven shoebox looking cars to try to appeal to that niche audience that was found in Japan and also here in America. They thought that the young people, if they liked it there, might like it here, because they were looking at SUV sales numbers when people were making families. And as a result, we got things like the Nissan Cube and, of course, the Scion XP and Honda Element. The keynote difference, however, between, say, the Element and its competition is the fact that the Element actually had something going for it. In fact, something quite serious going for it. And that was a manual option K24. Yeah, these came with K-series in them out the door, and you could get them in a manual, and of course, Honda being Honda, swapping it to a manual really isn't that difficult. You just gotta be willing to put in the effort. Who would have thought that Honda would have continued to make fun cars when their Civic of the same generation as the first generation of the Honda Element was actual trash? Of course, with this boxier styling meant that it was actually pretty livable, pretty stable. You could put a lot of things in it and makes for a great daily. I knew some friends in school that actually had these in their families and they loved them because they just were good. Great gas mileage, and you had a K-series, which meant you pretty much had one of the best engines ever built. Look into the engineering of it, it is intense. And space to put things like your dog and your groceries and your snowboards and skis on the top. It was great at doing whatever your life demanded of it. And that's why I personally think that if you're looking for a good daily, try to find one of these manual K-series. All of them had K-series, just not all of them had manuals. And even then, the auto really isn't that bad, given that a lot of autos of that generation were kind of meh. Y'all know what I'm talking about if you're older. Old autos just no, not the thing to do. But if you can get that manual, definitely go for it. I know they're not everyone's styling necessarily, but if you're willing to be creative and use all that free real estate on those cars, go for it. And of course, as always, our dark horse entry at the end. This time, it's a Honda Fit, or Honda Jazz if you're not in America. This is a car that flew under a lot of people's radar, despite being probably one of the coolest little cars on this list. Borderline a K car given the displacement of its engine, these things did not have a lot of power. They were, without question, a commuter car. They were built to be quality city cars that people could drive to work, drive a little bit long distance, be able to bring home their groceries and maybe their dog too. The idea was simply put, an everyday car. But what they built instead was something that I personally think should have been the real successor of the Honda Civic. Front wheel drive, handled like a champ, and great fuel economy, all three good hallmarks of the Civic. This thing just works really well. So much so that it even had some anime success. Yeah, look that up. It's crazy to me to think that a car like this didn't have a bigger following, despite the fact that it just wasn't loaded with a K series or a B series. Instead, it had the little tiny L series motor that Honda came up with. And while being a smaller motor didn't necessarily mean it wasn't less fun. After all, there are plenty of cars with little motors that are a lot of fun. Just, you know, look at the whole K car category, the K sports car category. Yeah, Honda wasn't pulling at, you know, sheer ideas. These were things that were already in existence. They just weren't as appreciated here in America until, well, now. After all, with the rising cost of fuel, a car that sips is going to be a lot more desirable than a car that chugs. See the failure of the Hummer. That's a great example of this. It's a shock to me that more people aren't aware of these cars because they do handle incredibly well. There is mod support for them. I mean, yeah, it has some Prius-ish looks to it. I personally think it looks a lot more fun. And while it is really small, you can do a lot with that little car. But with all of that said, what do you think? What do you think of these 5 Hondas? Let me know down in the comment section below. It's kind of interesting to me that for once, all the cars on this list I've had experiences with, both in stock and in lightly modified forms. It surprises me that in all of my polling data, not more people were aware of these cars, because there's just so much love for them. It's just really niche. And I'm hoping that this video and this entire series will help open people's eyes to new opportunities within the car world. We've gotten so fixed on a finite set of examples that we forget you can make anything cool as long as you just are willing to try. But with all that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And as always, God bless you guys. Take it easy and peace.